The house was quiet, with only the faint hum of traffic breaking the suburban silence. Sophia, a successful lawyer with a seemingly perfect life, stood at the kitchen sink, looking out the window at the neatly manicured lawns of her neighbors' homes. Her husband, Daniel, who's an architectural engineer, was away on another business trip, and their 2 kids were asleep upstairs. Despite the perfect exterior, she felt a deep sense of loneliness. One day, her younger brother Ethan relocated to New York and stayed with her family for a while. Ethan was 5 years her junior and was looking for a fresh start after a recent breakup. The siblings had always been close, and his presence brought a bit of joy to her otherwise routine life. His laugh and easygoing demeanor made her think of simpler times, like days spent running through fields and climbing trees. As time went on, things started to change between them. One night, Sophia couldn't sleep because she was stressed about work. She found Ethan in the kitchen, making her a cup of hot chocolate. The kitchen was softly lit, with just a little light coming from the stove. They sat at the table, holding mugs of hot chocolate, and talked about childhood memories and how they felt lonely. Ethan looked at her, his eyes reflecting the light from the stove. "You shouldn't have to carry so much on your own," he said gently, his voice soft with tenderness. The atmosphere became more intense, with a sense of unspoken tension between them. Sophia's heart was racing, but for a moment, she felt like the weight of her responsibilities was lifting. They chatted for hours on end, and the conversation flowed easily. Every word was like a soothing balm for their souls. By the time they finally called it a night, they had a real understanding between them. In the following weeks, their interactions became more complex. After a family gathering, Ethan stepped outside to have a cigarette in the backyard. The night air was cool and refreshing, and the moon gave the garden a silvery glow. Sophia joined him, and they stood side by side, getting closer with each word. They talked about their feelings and regrets under the moonlight. The air was thick with the smell of tobacco and the unspoken truths between them. Without warning, Ethan leaned in and gave her a kiss. Sophia paused for a moment, but didn't pull away. The kiss was light and cautious, but it sparked a passion within her that she hadn't known existed. Their secret affair began with stolen moments when Daniel and the kids were away. Sophia realized that Ethan was filling a gap in her life she hadn't realized was there. His touch, his smile, and the way he looked at her made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. But their secret relationship came with a heavy price: guilt and the constant fear of being caught. Sophia knew that this relationship could ruin not only her family, but also the bond she and Ethan shared as siblings. The guilt ate away at her each time they met, which was a double-edged sword. She was always on edge, feeling the pressure of the fear of being caught. But she just couldn't bring herself to end it. Ethan was a lifeline, a link to a part of herself she thought she'd lost. Their secret meetings were a source of both comfort and frustration. Each kiss was a reminder of the risk they were taking. One evening after a particularly intense encounter, Sophia lay in bed, her heart racing. She couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the knowledge that what they were doing was wrong. She rolled over and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what the future held. What if Daniel found out? What would happen to their kids? The weight of these questions kept her awake, and her thoughts were all over the place. Ethan, sensing her distress, tried to reassure her. "We can figure this out," he whispered one night as they lay in the dark, his arm around her. "We just need to be careful." But the fear of being found out only got worse. Sophia found herself becoming more and more reserved, and her interactions with Daniel and the kids were becoming strained. She knew she needed to end it, but the thought of losing Ethan was almost unbearable. The tension between them just kept on growing. Every moment they spent together was a source of pleasure and pain. They were close, sharing moments and secrets they'd only had together. One afternoon, while Daniel was at a conference and the kids were at school, Sophia and Ethan found themselves alone in the house. The air was thick with anticipation as they made their way through the familiar rooms, their hearts beating in sync. They met in the study, where the soft light from the window cast shadows across the room. Ethan looked at her and moved in closer. His hands found her waist, and he touched her gently but firmly, sending shivers down her spine. She leaned in and kissed him, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was both urgent and tender. The kiss deepened, and they explored each other's mouths. Ethan's hands explored her back, pulling her closer, and his touch kindled a fire within her. They made their way to the couch, a little awkward but also with desire. Ethan's fingers traced the line of her jaw, and his thumb brushed lightly over her lips. She closed her eyes, relishing the experience, her breathing becoming a little faster. He kissed her neck, his lips tracing a path of heat down to her collarbone. She arched her back, her body responding to his touch, and her hands slid up to tangle in his hair. Ethan reached for the buttons on her blouse. He undid each button slowly, his fingers trembling slightly. The fabric came undone, showing her lace bra. He took a moment to look at her, his eyes dark with desire. Sophia's heart was racing with the intensity of his gaze, making her feel both vulnerable and powerful. He leaned in and touched his lips to the fabric. His breath was warm against her skin. She shivered, reaching for the hem of his shirt and tracing her fingers across the smooth skin of his back. He let out a soft groan, his hands moving to her hips to pull her closer as he kissed her again. They had a strong connection, and their bodies moved in a way that was both familiar and new. Sophia reached for the button of his jeans. Her fingers shook a little as she undid the button. Ethan was taken aback when she pulled down his pants. His hands moved over her hips. He ended the kiss. Their eyes met. There was a question in his eyes. She gave a quick nod. She spoke in a soft, barely audible whisper. Absolutely. He moved closer and sat down so that he could pull her into his lap. His hands explored her body. He touched her. She explored, feeling the warmth of him and the way his body reacted to hers. It only made her want to get to know him better. They moved together, their movements slow and sensual, each touch a testament to the depth of their connection. The world around them disappeared, leaving only the two of them tangled up in a bit of an intimate embrace. The days after their meetings were a bit of a blur. Sophia went through the motions of her daily routine, but she felt like something was missing inside. She really missed him and couldn't stop thinking about him. She tried to focus on her work and her family, but she couldn't stop thinking about their time together. She knew she had to find a way to move forward and start healing. She also had to start putting the pieces of her life back together again. One evening, as she stood alone by the window, the morning light filtering through the curtains, Sophia realized that the road ahead would be challenging. She had to figure out how to reconcile her past actions with her current responsibilities. The future was up in the air, and she was feeling a bit anxious about what it would bring, but she knew she had to give it a shot. She took a deep breath and got ready for the journey ahead. She was determined to make things right, even if it meant facing the consequences of her choices. Eventually, Ethan decided to end things and end their affair. They met up one last time in the backyard, with the moon casting long shadows over the garden. "This isn't sustainable. I'll always love you," he said, his voice breaking a little. Sophia watched him leave, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and longing. She was really struggling to come to terms with what they had decided. The house was quiet, and the darkness seemed to swallow up every corner as Sophia walked slowly down the hall, feeling the weight of her decisions on her shoulders. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to tackle it head-on. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. She was sure she could find a way to move forward, to heal, and to rebuild her life. Ethan's touch and the intensity of their moments together would stay with her, a bittersweet reminder of how deep her feelings ran and how tricky her choices were.